Good day and welcome to StudioSense. Today's pastel demo is Saddle Pass Trail out Badlands National Park, and we'll go over a grayscale composition, fixing a composition, doing acrylic underpainting, rocks, and that good old aerial perspective. If you go to my website, you will see a holiday sale. It's the time of the year. It's November 29th, and that holiday sale will go on through December 31st. So please visit the website. So we'll start off sketching the thirds in the shape of the paper, basically to do a simple grid. I'm using a fresh stick of vine charcoal, which I like using for sketching compositions, and basically we'll lay out the major masses and details of the composition. And the composition I'm creating is a circular composition. So you'll see that I'm placing these objects in such a fashion that you've got a sort of like a bowl shape area here of rocks in the foreground. And my plan is to draw the viewer's attention along this bowl and up toward those distant buttes at Badlands on the Saddle Pass Trail. And you'll notice with the reference photo there on the left that the sun is rising from behind those buttes, and they're really washing out a lot of the color, local color of those sandstone rocks. So we'll have to compensate for that in the painting. A little bit of shading, shadowing done. There were very strong shadows at this time of the morning. So I put some of those in below the rocks or to the left, lower left of the rocks with the vine charcoal, and then roughly sketching out the outside, the shapes of the buttes. And if you look at the reference photo, there are several layers of different values. There's the dark shaded values, sort of like on the right half of the landscape, and then ripples of deep green grasses and very light orange yellow grasses in the prairie there at that plateau up at Saddle Pass Trail. With the vine charcoal, I'm trying to identify where the darker shadows are, as well as to begin to craft some of the curved lines that will draw the viewer's attention toward the distance. You'll probably tell by now that this video is speeded up 2 times the actual length of time. The buttes themselves have striated rocks, and you can see some of the stripes. Hard to see them on the reference photo, but I'll be pulling some of those into the final painting too. So I'll go about doing this task to outline some of those rocks, and there's this more defined pathway that moves from just like the lower center of the painting often up to the left. And then I'll have that kind of connect with similar um, thinner pathway toward the buttes in the distance. And I threw those last rocks in there just to add a little bit of balance to the composition. Here's my first correction. I thought the rocks were a bit too much uh, duplicative. There's pointing in the same direction. So I eliminated that one rock that was just quite a double to the rock on the left of it, and um, changed the shapes of the rocks and did a little bit of outlining here. So when you use the vine charcoal, and then I'll use an acrylic underpainting, you're going to want to spray or fix the canvas with a fixative so it doesn't smudge. So just adding some more dark blotches here. There are a fair amount of glistening light in this landscape with the early sun and the tips of the prairie grasses capturing the sunlight. The buttes themselves, they do have broken edges and crevices, etc., that I'm going to want to convey. And I'm picking some of those up also with the vine charcoal. I'm going to give you a hint about one of the another composition correction that we're going to make here. And the hint is the buttes themselves, the two large sandstone masses in the distance. And the hint, if you could think about why I might go ahead and correct that, I'm going to give you the answer anyway. I think they're very similar in shape and height. So that is somewhat of a duplication also. So as when you're working on a painting and you step back and you look at it and you think what you want to change, what's working, what's not working, think about what in the composition might need change. Hopefully, most of the composition has really been figured out. You've done sketches and worked up some studies. I actually skipped doing a sketch on this one, so I ended up making a change. The two large buttes are, in addition to them being similar in shape, they take up about 2/3 of that horizon area, the top portion of the painting. So we'll go over this when we make this correction, but I'll tell you that the change that I'll make creates more of an expansive vista of this particular scene. Probably similar to the reference photo itself, because on the reference photo, that second butte is smaller, the butte off to the left. I'll continue applying some shading and line drawing at this stage of the composition with the willow charcoal. The shadows in this particular reference photo were really strong. So we'll go through how to create effective shadows. We could think of mostly of them as being dark, right? Dark blues, dark grays, or whatever. But the shadows are simply lower value of the colors that we're seeing here in the landscape. The beige, tan, orange type colors that are out here. So we'll show you how we kind of spruce up the shadow area once we get to that stage of the game. Just adding in here the horizon. There's more buttes in the distance, so you could see they're vaguely a little darker blue buttes further out. More line drawing to reinforce some of the elements in the landscape. I like to build a really sharp, bold foreground in my paintings, and this particular reference photo lends oneself to be very vague and distant, hazy in the distance. So we'll be sharp, bold rocks in the foreground and a hazy distance is what we'll do. So here's the acrylic underpainting now. The overriding hue in this Badlands landscape is an orange, reddish, purplish color. Very light, very dry, almost desert-like at times, depending on the time of day you're visiting and the time of the year. So I'll put in some reddish alizarin crimson and blue, deep blue acrylic colors. I've already sprayed the surface of the composition with the fixative so that the black vine charcoal doesn't blend in with the acrylic paint. And I'll use a very dark blue, almost blue-black acrylic color for some of the deeper shaded areas here. I would experiment with I like to use a light red-orange underpainting for green grasses to enhance the popping of the colors using the complementary of green, which is red, of course. So we'll do some of that in here, some of the dark reds, also for the deeper, more shaded gullies or paths that you see in the reference photo. Use some lighter tones for the distance, and there's a lot of orange in this landscape. The prairie grasses are very light colored, so we'll kind of establish that with this color of acrylic and this value of the acrylic paint. Some of the acrylics are reasonably washed out with water, so you'll get some dripping in the painting that kind of adds a nice impact effect. Um, but you'll also be careful that you get a little bit of a pooling down at the bottom of your paper. I'm using UArt sanded paper. It's the 400 grade. Just blocking around the rocks now, and I'll start um, creating some of the rock shadows as well as the rocks themselves with some of the darker acrylics. The foam brush comes in really well. Here I've used regular paint brushes and I've used foam brushes, and each of them seems to have a good good purpose. But in this particular case, I like to use the foam brush, move a little faster, a little touch up with a stiff brush, however. So soon we'll be done with this acrylic underpainting. So I like to use the complementaries for the grasses. So if you have the red out there, you have a lot of orange, yellow orange in the landscape. So I'll just throw some acrylic orange down here. The purple blues of the distance, and the reds tend to kind of replicate some of the true colors of the sandstone at Badlands. The acrylic underpainting does not take very long to dry. If you get buckling in the paper, I would detach it from if it's mounted or taped to a board, and I like to lay it down, picture side down, and then throw a throw some heavy books on top of it to help flatten it out. That usually does a good job in getting the paper to be pretty flat to be secured again to a base board. I'm using some pan pastels now, and this is a very yellowish orange color for the sky to stick with my orange theme here. The pan pastels are applied with they're sponges, and it's easy to quickly block in a sky with pan pastels. I've used them effectively with blue to do my blue skies, and there's some greens that you can mix in into the skies, and also so I find it handy to kind of get a head start on the painting by using pan pastels. And I scumbled a little bit above outside of the rocks, the buttes there to enhance some of that hazy look at the edges of those large mountainous figures in the distance. I used some lighter pan pastels to create also some of the distant haze, and also picked up some red pan pastels to uh, enhance some of the sharper areas of the distant buttes. So we don't want too much detail in the distance. We really want that detail and sharpness in the foreground. So even though the photograph does have a fair amount of detail on the left butte there, the larger one, but a lot of it is because of that strong light coming from behind it, really enveloped the whole area and hazed it out somewhat. So I'll be a little bit selective there. in adding these details. So I've given up on the pan pastels now. I'm switching to plain old regular handheld pastels, and I've got Rembrandt that I'm using here to soften up some of the edges. And typically I'll use Unisons and Great American Artworks. The other pastel I like is Mount Vision. Some we'll find that some edges here on these large boulders are strong, some are very soft, so we'll have some lost and found edges here as the sunlight impacted that sharpness, and we'll also build some layers in these rocks. So that's where I kind of digressed from the reference photo. I've been to Badlands several times, so I could kind of know what and taken a lot of photographs, so I kind of know what I'm looking for in terms of the rock structures and how sunlight and shade plays along with them. So if you ever get a chance to go there, it's amazing to go there early in the day or late in the day and see how sunlight really changes the landscape, changes the colors, creates wonderful shades, shadows of these hues. Here comes some of the green pastels. This is a Mount Vision, very deep green pastel for the darker shaded grassy areas that you could see in the reference photo. There's a lot of color in these paintings of the Badlands. I've done several paintings of the Badlands, which you can see on my website, and there's almost a gaudiness of the color. And again, that's as I just mentioned. If you spend time early in the day and late in the day there, you see a lot of that color there, and um, it almost looks cartoonish. Some of the images that you could create with reference photos of the Badlands. So the photographs are just very colorful. So I like to bring those colors in. We'll also kind of mute them somewhat, especially in the distance when you lose that local color. Here's a nice deep blue black unison that I love to use for dark shaded areas. And there's where I'm creating a little more of a shaded rock outcrop there in the distance. I like to use that in the shaded areas, also behind the rocks, is also in the deep green gullies, the green trail. I'll throw some of that deep blue black in there also. Again, the distance needs to be a little hazier and less local color, so we'll bring in some light beige hard pastel and scumble over what I've just done with the underpainting as well as with the pan pastel orange hue. I like to put some movement in my paintings, and there was not very much going on in terms of movement up there. There was no wind or no water moving or anything like that. So the movement is conveyed by the trails that I've built here, and the interplay of the early morning light on parts of that trail. So trying to convey that sense of movement, kind of be creative in terms of how you will interpret that reference photo. This is a very pale Mount Vision green pastel, very light. And now it feels that the color is beginning to replicate a little better the reference photo, especially with those light grasses. Roughly using the side of the pastel, really rough marks here and slices of color. Very bright in the foreground, as you can see in the reference photo. So I'm bringing in a light Mount Vision. It's a very light orange. It's almost a white pastel, but I find that if you really take some broad strokes to get the essence of what you're trying to convey here with the reflections of the sunlight on those rocks and with the very bright foreground that I'm putting in here there. And you step back and you say, okay, is that about the what I want to convey in terms of focus? Because your eyes really do now kind of hone in on that foreground. And as I mentioned, we're going to make that sharper and bolder than the distance. And be careful. Try not to create or draw every leaf of a bush and all that. You want to do the masses. So up here, here's the composition change now. I felt that they were too even, so I'm sketching with a very light pastel how I want to slice off the upper left of that left butte. So now I've drawn it in, okay? So that's what I'm going to get rid of here, and it creates a more of a distance. Uh, and I'm going to put my mask on, of course, because they're going to be brushing with a rough brush here some of the pastel off of that site. I'm not going to do any erasure. You know, the acrylic is there, so I need to handle the acrylic. So I'm going to take some of that pan pastel again, the same sky color that I used before, and coat that over that rock. And as you can see, it doesn't do that great a job in hiding the redness of the rock. So I'll take a hard pastel, one of the Mount Visions actually, and continue to work over that. It'll take a little bit to get rid of that, but at the end of the day, it's going to be totally gone. And you'll never know it was there. A few spots here and there. I then sprayed the spot with fixative. As you can see, it darkened that section that I removed, but then with my very light orange-white Mount Vision, blocked in further coverage, and then took that light Mount Vision to go over the remainder of the sky. And then I'll start bringing in some very simple, non-distracting clouds into the horizon. So with all those changes, the butte is now a different shape, and it works better. It kind of opens up the vista a bit further. Continuing to show that hazy edge effect from that strong light. When we start applying some lighter orange colors, that distance will show you how we scumble some more sunlight over the foreground, front sections of those buttes. This pastel is a Great American Artworks, and it's like a slate color, blue slate color, which comes in handy for rocks. So we'll use that throughout here. The patterns that are in these grasses and in the prairies, we'll want to continue to work those also with using some lighter highlighted highlight type pastels. Again, this kind of gives the movement, puts some of this movement into the painting. Is capturing some more shaded areas of the rocks. As for the reference photo, there was a second reference photo that I used. It had a different layout of rocks and some really unique rocks that I wanted to throw into the painting. So I used a different reference photo, a second reference photo, which I'm not displaying here, that had rocks shown in a different direction, and so it doesn't hurt at all to take many photographs of a particular scene if you're interested in doing a painting of it, and then borrowing components from one photo to the other and juxtapositioning them into a unique landscape. That is something that could easily be done, and it's some of that artist license. The challenge there is if lighting is different, then you'll need to kind of recognize how it might different lighting might play if one reference photo has light coming from a direction that's different from the other reference photo, so you don't want to be aware of that. Here's a light pastel used to help carve out some of the negative space around this rock, and also to help carve some of the highlights in the rock. This is a very light yellow green pastel. This is also, I believe, also another Mount Vision. Nope, actually, this is a Unison. Looking to build some of that sharpness and contrast in the foreground, this very deep blue pastel does the trick here. There are varying waves of vegetation here, even though the vegetation is all the same, pretty much the prairie grasses, but different colors and different areas of different heights. So there's a lot of interplay and movement, really, in terms of the shapes and the shadows. Picking up some of the striation here, as well as the hazy effect down at the base of the buttes. I've got a light purple gray pastel which comes in really handy, and it's an old Rembrandt that's been worn down, but it comes in real handy to create that aerial perspective of the distance. So there's a good case of aerial perspective there with that right edge hill of the uh, left butte there. It was a clear sunny morning, so there's no fog or any atmospheric droplets or anything like that are affecting the aerial perspective. It's just really all that distance you can see so far in the Badlands. When we talk about focal point in a painting, the section below that left butte, the smaller one, the one that we reduced in size, there's going to be a lot of bright light there that's going to contrast significantly with the dark shaded areas. And that's the area where your eyes will kind of take you along the trail, along the gully that you see, that deeper green, toward that back area. The tops of the grasses, of course, are the lighter greens that are picking up sunlight, so we're going to want to apply some of that higher value up there and balance it out there a little bit in the distance and other areas in the foreground. The palette knife is one of my favorite blending tools. So to convey those blended grasses, the softness of those grasses can be highlighted or enhanced here by using this particular plastic palette knife. So there's some value transitions to be aware of also. So right there where I'm going to call it the deep gully, I guess, and we're going to have to soften up as we firm that up. We're going to make it a little darker, but also we're going to firm it up and soften the values, lighten the values around the edges to create a better transition of light. In a painting, I like to convey an imbalance of lights and darks. So if I were to squint and look at this particular landscape, most of it is light, right? A lot of it's light and there's darks in here, and I would say there's definitely an imbalance, but maybe a third of the landscape is dark with between the shaded areas of the buttes and the shadows, and the balance is pretty bright. So rather than a half and half light and dark, you want to get an imbalance there. Here's my favorite dark blue black pastel to do the deep um, crevices of that gully pathway. And then, you could use a dark value like that to help create some of the contrast that you want to convey. But then you can bring a more accurate color, local color, on top of that value. So I'll bring some green in there, and I'll also bring some mauves. There's a fair amount of mauve type color in this landscape, and go over that dark color, as well as as you can see, the burnt orange color that I just applied, throwing that on top of the deep blue, which also gives a nice pop or a nice contrasty effect. This is a brush with some isopropyl alcohol wash, just to help kind of create some of the more shaded areas of these rocks, and the bumps and different edges that you see on a boulder like that. And I'll use this also to kind of try to enhance some of the darks through the painting. Also, if some of this spills and kind of drips down, they could create an interesting effect, as well as it did with the acrylic paint. So again, squint at this, look at it, and say, okay, where are the darks here? These are very sharp darks that'll be conveyed in the painting. As you can see, some of that's dripped down. We'll just let that dry and continue to apply pastel. Some of those edges are firmer than other edges on the distant rocks. You want to vary those edges also. The rocks in the foreground now, they need a little bit more shaping up, so you can't really tell that they're rocks. They're just kind of a bundled, jumbled mass of dark and light slabs. So I'll start blocking out the edges of those rocks. And the rocks themselves, if you look at the reference photo, they have a orange mauve color hue to them. They're sandstone, so they certainly will convey that type of color. But again, favoring that blue cast of the shaded areas. Some of the edges of the rocks are brought out by working on the landscape area outside of the rock, just as that little green area that I added there, as well as the light area I added earlier on to that larger rock on the right. The most of the highlights on the rocks were right on their edges, and some of the highlights captured other small portions of the rocks, but mostly on the edges. You're just sitting in the sun there. So that's what we'll do with this particular pastel. This is a very, very light blue pastel and is also almost a white Mount Vision. I'll typically not use white in my paintings other than to try to to help work on creating a fogginess in distance, although a light blue works really well in building a foggy atmosphere. If you use digital reference photos, it's wonderful to take a photograph, a digital image of a large rock and just blow it up on your computer screen. And you can see so much in terms of color and small shapes and cracks. And it just becomes a lot of fun to convey those with pastel and with acrylic paints and with the edges of say an edge of a tortillon or using the edge of the palette knife and using sharp edged pastels to build some of those sharp edges. Here I'm bringing some of that brown, orange brown into the color here. We're going to want to mute that a bit also at some point and just kind of blend it into the soft stones here. In working with pastels, try to capitalize on the medium. Try to convey those marks that we like to see, those broad swaths of pure color. And it just adds so much to it really takes advantage of the medium. And also you could create really kind of emotional kind of landscapes with those strong, bold marks of the pastel. This pastel is somewhat of a rusty color. This is Great American Artworks, and this comes in handy also for the more shaded areas of these rocks. Beginning now to separate out the rocks with shaded areas, just showing where one rock starts and one rock stops. I like to use pastel pencils on rocks also. Besides the sharp edge of the pastels, pastel pencils come in really handy in building some of the sharpness. That right side, lower right side of the landscape here is pretty much unfinished. We're going to start adding a little more masses in there and a little more color, bringing back that very light green pastel, using the side of it and up and down horizontal strokes so that it really conveys the grasses that are growing upwards, of course, in that direction. So little by little, we're building some detail into this landscape. Again, it's stepping back and looking at it and realizing, well, what needs to be done next, what works and what doesn't work. Hold up a mirror and look at your painting from the mirror. You'll look at it all in reverse and you'll find, which I did in this particular case, that I was able to identify where I wanted a little more highlights and sunlight in the painting to give it more balance. And it was the mirror that kind of pointed that out to me to say, hey, why don't we do this, make this little change? And I did. So I veered from the reference photo with that very dark butte area back there, created actually another small butte section that was not in the in the reference photo, and I want to build that out a bit further, which you'll see shortly. I'll start darkening out a little bit more of that. So it kind of created a few different layers of those distant rocks. Again, carving out those rocks, those collection of rocks there in the lower middle of the painting. So what's developing here is that that the lines that are going to take the viewer's eye up through the painting. So you're kind of starting here from the rock area and going up through that gully and up then gradually to the right, and we'll build even more of a of dark shaded area that'll keep the eyes flowing toward that bright area below that second butte there on the left. So in general, though, it is a circular type of a composition, sort of like bowl shape as you look at the rocks at the bottom here, and going up and around toward the right, toward those buttes. Picking up certainly more highlights on those that cluster of rocks there in the center. As you think about working edges in the paintings, um, you'll want to block in surrounding areas, just as I did with these rocks, and putting in some of the greenery around that little cluster of rocks there in the center, and highlighting the ground, the lightness of the ground outside of the rocks to help really create the shapes, build the shapes of those objects in the landscape. At this point, I'm doing a fair amount of highlights where the sun either kind of glistened in the fields or on the opposite side, enhancing some of the contrast of the dark um, portions of the shaded areas. Continuing to work the shadows here. This is that deep blue black pastel that at this point is really blocking in the value, and I'm going to want to add different colors of the similar value to those shaded areas, and recognizing that a shaded area reflects the color to some extent of the object that it's in the shade of. So we would want some of that mauve and yellowish or orangish kind of color in the shaded areas also. As you can see here, I'm applying that kind of that rusty color into the shaded areas that represent some of the color in the rocks, and trying to keep the value of that color added to the shade about the same, a little bit lighter than the shade, but about the same. So here I'm applying a little bit of a lighter blue to the shade. The edges of the shadows are softer, and certainly as the further you go away from an object that is conveying a shadow, those edges are much softer. They're stronger up front, as you can see with that large rock on the right, how strong that shadow is. But then I'll soften it up a bit as we get away from the rock and bring in some of this other lighter blue color to help blend in or fade in that the edges of the shadow against the ground outside of the shaded areas. When we talk about highlights to rocks, you'll want to capture a value that is a little darker than the highest value highlights on the edges of the rocks to convey the diminution of that brightness as you move away from that highlighted area, the flat surface that's facing the sun, for example. So it's a little bit of a lighter, a little bit of a darker value here that you can see applying to the large rock in some of the areas below the highlighted area, which is the portions that's facing the sun. Again, carving out some of the space outside of the rock to help enhance the edge of the rock. And bringing in that sharpness that I'd like to convey in the foreground. As I mentioned, that focal point up there where I'm highlighting some light color here. This is a light, very light yellow white of a Mount Vision pastel, and I want the viewer's attention to head toward that spot. So I'm highlighting that again, using that side of the pastel in an up and down fashion to convey the edges of the grasses, the soft and the lightest portions of the upper parts of the grasses in this prairie. And just be kind of random here in terms of creating variety. The palette knife helps again blend those edges. You really want soft edges. The part of the focal point here, though, in that spot there below that butte to the left, is going to be more of a strong, solid line, and that also helps build that sense of a focal point in the painting. Now, likely there were grasses there, and that's what drove that reflection. But I decided to keep that a little strong, a stronger pastel mark to help gain attraction to that particular area. There's really no rhyme or reason why I would work on one part of the painting versus another. When I start a painting, I typically would start from the sky, block in the sky, and then work my way down toward the lower portion of the sanded pastel paper. That also helps keep the fragments of pastel to scatter down below what I've been working on, rather than completing a section down below, for example, and then having pastel dust drop from the sky down to that area, trying to avoid that. So that's why I typically work from top to down on the first layer of pastels. But then at this point, I'm really enhancing various parts of the painting, some areas of which are hardly painted at all, like still that lower mid right section there is rather vague. So we're going to want to add some more masses in there and a little more detail. So as you expand the photograph or enlarge the photograph of rocks, you'll be able to pick up all these nuances of cracks and bumps, etc. This is a Rembrandt pastel. It's a dark brown slash reddish kind of color, and I thought that would come in handy also with the edges, using the edges to help getting some of the cracks conveyed in the sandstone. So more detail here. I try not to overwork the elements in a pastel painting. If you find that you're continuing to work over and change and work over and enhance, modify, whatever certain sections of your painting, um, you don't want it to make it look like you've done just a bit too much on the painting. Let it be loose with pastels, and you know, as long as it's technically correct, it doesn't even hurt that that part of your painting is even blurred out to help enhance the focal areas. Some areas just don't need any detail. Some of the, you know, the grassy areas toward the upper part of this painting are pretty much not going to change from what you see right now. So this is a piece of charcoal that that I thought, let me apply some of this back into the rock areas and the darkest areas, and then on top of that, so first of all, it will help to enhance where the contrast is that I want to pick up, and and the sharpness of the foreground, and then I'll since I try not to use black. Uh, in any landscape, because typically you don't see black in a landscape other than burnt wood, for example. I'll take um, a pastel and apply it on top of the black. Maybe it's a dark blue, maybe it's a little bit of dark purple, but it'll be very close to the value of the black, a little lighter value, of course, to neutralize the impact of the black. So a lot of orange in this. So I wanted to make sure that I got a nice hard pastel. Again, stroking it in the fashion that it's the up-down fashion that represents the grasses. I would certainly highly recommend a visit to Badlands National Park, located in South Dakota, and it's about an hour and a half east of Rapid City and in Mount Rushmore, along Route 90. It's very easy to get to, and you could drive through the park, like for a half hour leisurely drive, and see so much from that perspective. It's, and if you really get into the park, it's just striking geological deposits, and some of the world's richest fossil beds have been found in the park and in this area of South Dakota. And there's a wonderful museum, geology museum, uh, in Rapid City. If you get a chance to visit this, I think it's the South Dakota School of Mines. So we want to bring more of the orange, even the orange, and trying doing a little bit of balance of colors here by taking some of the orange that we're seeing in the field and applying it to the rocks and the sandstone rocks, and getting that balance of color in here. You also see a good amount of wildlife in the park. Prairie dogs are quite numerous, as well as bison. So there's a road. Can't recall the name of the road that you could take. It's a dirt road, but you see a lot of views of bison grazing in the prairies. This is a softer pastel, softer orange, American Artworks pastel that I just used there. Back to the buttes in the distance. So as I mentioned, I wanted to create another layer dimension of rocks back there that's really in the shade, in the shadow of the large butte to the right. It's not in the reference photo, but I just wanted to kind of build on that a bit further. And the contrast that I could build here using that very light, hard purple pastel purple gray pastel, by creating that haze of the distance, helped build the contrast on that particular scene as the sun is kind of shining through that area of between those two large buttes. Decided to add a little more color to the large butte on the right with it's a red orange pastel. Don't want to do too much here because I don't want it to distract from the sharpness of the foreground. So much of this painting is a mixed grass prairie, and that's a grassland where grasses of many different heights grow, and that kind of gives us some of the variety here that we're seeing in the colors of the landscape. See that orange, that deep orange that I put in the shadow of the large rock on the right? That's what I mean by bringing some of that reflective color from the object that is creating the shadow into the shadow itself. I did add a bit of detail here, so there are some really specific grasses in the foreground of the reference photo, very light grasses. So you see some of those. Here I'm highlighting again that contrast between shade and light. And you could vary the pressure of applying your pastel stick, and that will create even more highlights and more strokes, more painterly effects in the painting. Better pastel marks as we'll call them. The most common grass in the Badlands is the western wheatgrass, and that grows 1 to 3 feet tall. It's the state grass of South Dakota, of all things. So, prairie dogs, bison, and also pronghorn sheep can be seen in the Badlands grazing on those grasses. So a little more color, more of that butte color in that distant horizon there, and then bringing in my little favorite dark hard Rembrandt pastel to help enhance the variety of the rock edges. Again, this is where I took that black charcoal and I'm laying over some of the local color on top of the black. So we're not really looking at black in the painting, but we're looking at the true hue of reflecting the colors of those rocks. There are the dark shadow areas there, those two rocks here. And there are prairie rattlesnakes in Badlands National Park. You'll occasionally see a sign saying "Stay on the trail, beware of snakes," and they are out there. So this is a light gray green pastel that I'm using here to help create a little more variety on that lower right side of the painting, as well as building some highlights with a very light yellow here, the yellow whitish um, pastel. You don't need a whole lot of detail here, just kind of showing some of the distinctive masses is enough. you'll look at a painting and say, hey, is there a part that I forgot to do? And that does come up every so often. So again, stand back at your paintings and look at them and go back. Use the mirror. Look at them from a far distance and then different angles to see what else you might need to put into a painting. There are grasses in this area here, so this is a mid to light green, and I'll kind of scumble that over a bit. This area here had a little greenery in it also with a little orange tops looking at those particular grasses. It's a little more color. So now this section looks like it's got a little more variety to it, and we'll add a little bit more darker value with the bases of the grasses, and then we'll kind of blend that in too. I will eventually add a little bit of detail in this area. It's kind of what you would expect to see, but not a whole lot. So throughout the painting, not a whole lot of examples, but there are some complementary colors juxtaposed, next to each other, like the dark blues and the orange, or the blue and orange complementary. We have a little bit of the orange, red, and the green, so we have a little complementary look there also. This painting has, I would say it's a fair variety of colors. Sometimes it could be more effective with a more limited palette. If you ever tried doing a painting with a limited palette, they can be quite pleasing. I've got a few examples in my gallery on my website. Sacred Dancing Falls, a painting I recently did of Sacred Dancing Falls rapids in Glacier National Park, is almost all gray and blue. So I thought that was a kind of a fun little project of a painting to do. This particular one and the other Badland paintings tend to have a lot of color in them. It's amazing if you've seen the sunrise at Badlands and at the have a really grand vista of the distance. You could see greens and pinks and purples and orange and yellows and all kinds of colors. So it as I mentioned earlier, it's almost like a cartoon. When you actually see it in reality, it just feels that way. Getting that trusty plastic palette knife to help blend in a bit, and also pushing it up and down to convey again the direction of the growth of the grasses. So the Pastel Society of America conveyed comments from jurors of various juried exhibits to share some of their thoughts about what makes a painting selected for like a Pastel Society of America show or award-winning type painting. And they look for several characteristics, and you can even see the characteristics on the Pastel Society of America website in terms of what they're looking for. But the fundamentals of drawing are important. They look at the design elements, the lines in the painting, the color values, the shape, form, the texture, the amount of space in the paintings. The various design principles, for example, like is there balance in the painting? And if I look at this landscape, there's balance between the large buttes in the upper right portion of the painting and the massive rocks down here at the lower and the lower left. I'm just adding a little more now, a little more of that hard orange, dark orange pastel into some of the creases of the rocks. And then, as I mentioned, the transition of a rock from a highlighted area to this area next to it could be a bit of a softer or lower value than the highlights. So I did some of that with that bluish gray pastel that I had just added to that rock there. And there's some more of that, bringing a little more of that blue shadow in there too. So design principles in a painting, we get back to that, is balance in the painting, emphasis on certain areas, such as that light focal area, that light area uh, in the painting, at the upper center of the painting. The movement, and in this particular case, really the kind of maybe the grasses could be conveyed as movement, but also the the gully and the trail that I've baked in here. Proportion, big items, small items. I think the improvement that we did to the butte on the left by shrinking its size helped us uh, enhance the variety of the proportion of the structures in the painting. The patterns, the rhythm, um, unity in the painting, and unity through the colors and the balance of the orange colors, as you could see now, that are in various portions of the painting. Execution is another factor in judging a painting. What is the artist's facility in handling the medium? So we're really talking about pastels here. So you could do a fantastic painting in pastels that looks like it's the quality of the Hudson River painters in great detail, etc. But in reality, that same painting could have probably been done in oils. So when you think about it, you've not really taken advantage of the medium of pastel. So by broad strokes and pure color and contrast, etc., you could do with pastels, and you can really exude the value of the medium, the uniqueness of the medium. So another factor that judges will look for is expression of an idea or an emotion, something that might incite intrigue or evoke an emotional response. And so, did you ever think about seeing a painting and saying to yourself, "Wow, that really stands out," or "That's shocking," or something that really evokes that emotion? And that'd be something else that to convey in a painting. I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of emotion in this particular painting. I sort of call this a travel painting. When I do the travels in the national parks, I'll pick some of those iconic scenes and create a painting for them. And my collectors usually, if they've taken a trip there, would be interested in having that painting. So this is more of a travel kind of a painting, or my national parks paintings are. Other paintings that you've seen on my website, such as Inspiration Point, which is another video here, a YouTube video I would really recommend that you watch, is more of an abstract, kind of a really bold color, a lot of acrylic in there, really interesting hues. You might want to check that out. The rocks in the distance, they should not be that dark, so they are picking up light on that side of it, and then we'll highlight the right edges of those also just a bit. And I also put in some more of the grasses to overlap that dark gully there. I wanted to soften it a bit, soften the darkness of the gully a bit, which I was able to convey by with those grasses. There's some of the highlights of the rocks out that distance, and even a little more highlight, a little more glistening light. So when I think of how am I going to design a painting, or when I look at a photograph, how do I want to convey that? Well, I think first of all I have to decide what do I want to convey in the painting. What is it about that scene that I'd really like to convey? Here I'm building a little more contrast now between the dark edges of those rocks and the grasses by applying that light pastel. So decide what the focal point's going to be, or the kind of the lines and how they'll draw the viewer's the view into the painting, the shapes in the painting. Do a notan, which is typically I actually like the two value notan. They're really black and I guess I would say black and white, right? In terms of getting some of the high level value perspective. Where is the darkest? What are the darkest masses of the painting, and do a note on for that. Knowing what values you're going to use for the painting, and do a grayscale. Let me just jump in here because I wanted to pick up some of the highlights now from the sun shining in from behind these rocks. So a little lighter value orange, which I felt added a nice touch to that distance there to pick up uh, some of that early morning sunlight. So think about what values you need for the painting, and do a grayscale photo of your work in process and the grayscale version of the reference photo, and compare them and see if you're pretty close uh, to the values there that you'll want to convey. Now, recognizing a photograph will um, do a little damage to the true values in nature. It will darken the darks and lighten the lights in the sky. You might not see any clouds even though there were clouds. So you need to be conscious of that when you do that value comparison. And then the other thing is I like to think about what impact I could create with this painting. What about maybe an underpainting, a really bold color underpainting that partially shows through? Maybe the texture and if you do like an acrylic underpainting, you could create texture on the sanded paper that raises above the level of the pastel, kind of bumps and stuff like that. And you can do that, and you can get a little pastel in them, but sometimes the pastel won't hold there, and the acrylic shining through will really be okay, and it might create a nice approach. You can look at, do you tone the paper? In this particular case, is a very high value painting and a lot of oranges. So should I have just simply toned this sanded paper in a light orange color and then did the painting on top of it? That's another possibility. It'd be interesting to try that again from that approach. In the sky, what I'm doing is I'm using a little more middle value purple and pinks to create some streaks, and that also helps de-emphasize the change I made to that second butte. If you can see anything left of that portion I removed by throwing some of this sky change in, that kind of helps balance out that particular change. I got to look at the edges too to make sure the edges are reasonably soft and sharp. And if they're going to have a soft edge, it needs to have a soft edge, but I don't want a broken edge here in the distance. So I think that distance now looks good in terms of the edges of the buttes, the large buttes. There's a slightly almost like a lavender color, and there were clouds in the sky. If you take the digital photo and significantly reduce the contrast, that'll show contrast actually in very light areas. Of all things, you'd imagine that. I can't imagine that works somehow, so that if your sky is washed out in your digital photo, reduce the contrast, and then you'll start seeing the clouds. I do the same with Mount Rainier with a painting I did, another demo that I did, where the photograph of Mount Rainier was very washed out, being in the distance and a very bright day. So I had to reduce the contrast of the um, digital photo in order to actually see portions of the mountain. So we begin to ask the age-old question about how do you know when you're done with the painting? And perhaps like many of you, when I'm working on a painting day after day after day, I actually start getting tired of it. I'm thinking, all right, I'm not sure I like it as much, but I think it's just a matter of that I've been spending so much time on it, I got to maybe put it away and start another painting. So this painting, I think it's almost done. I just keep going back and forth and reworking some areas, some edges, some of the color some of the shaded areas and the dark portions of the rocks back and forth. And it becomes more of an artist's preference because you want to check the boxes, right? You want to make sure it's technically accurate and it kind of holds together. Does the are the values reflecting the direction of where the sun is coming from, for example? Simple stuff, technical stuff like that, to be clear about, to make sure that they're accurate. And once you got those all taken care of, then there are some personal preferences that you might want to fix, change here and there. I softened up some of the darkness in those rocks, by the way, with that. This is a gray blue uh, pastel, soft pastel, and then a few more highlights. Some of the orange grasses kind of jump out in this particular scene, so I wanted to contrast those with the dark gully there, bringing in that dark brown reddish um, pastel. And I wanted to do is I wanted to I think the edge of that butte there on the right, a couple of changes we need to make. It's um, it seems to end right at the end of the pathway, that trail, and I want to stretch that out further, so I'll do that in a bit also. Some of the striated rocks, some of the stripes that you see at Badlands, trying to bring some of that in here. So here's more of that orange picking up from the sun. So all these rocks were formed by two simple processes, deposition and erosion. Deposition is the process of rocks gradually building up. So over the course of millions of years, the layered rocks of the Badlands were stacked on top of each other like a sort of like a layer cake. And and these rocks were deposited by all kinds of forces, like shallow inland seas, rivers, wind, you name it. Um, and erosion, of course, is what's been going on for a long time up there. Badlands began eroding about a half million years ago as the Cheyenne and White Rivers carved their way through the landscape. I'd recommend going to Badlands National Park, National Park Service website. A lot of this information is there, and you can learn more about it and learn about visiting the park. I don't think I'd want to go to the park in the middle of winter. It gets very cold and windy up there, but it also gets very hot. I've been there in July and June, and it's been like 80. It's been actually one trip was about I think it was about 100 degrees. This is a Sennelaire pastel of a yellow orange color. Try not to get much yellow in your distance because yellow goes away as a color as you move further and further distant. And so if you look at greenery, for example, greens look more blue in the distance because the yellow of that green has gone away because of the light spectrum. So that's why greens look sort of blue in the distance. Just a more variety, more sparkly points in the painting I'm adding in various locations. Here I'm even lightening up that portion even further. And I think soon I'll be taking my pastel pencils out and work a few areas there to enhance. Pastel pencils are a great tool for blending also. Blending as well as if you want to neutralize a color with its complementary, pick the complementary pastel pencil and scumble that over, brush it over, and that'll do the trick for you also. I think as any artist should kind of decide, what's your niche, right? What's your niche? What's your specialty? You have a specialty that you're going to do, and it could be a size of a painting you do. You do 9 by 12s, 12 by 16s. It could be the type of landscape. You maybe just do waterfalls, mountains. Try not to be too cliche with things though, like barns and things like that you see a lot of. Um, Again, here I'm working on some of the grasses. Well, I'll jump in here with some of the light yellow green to and some rough marks here to um, add a little more detail, a little more of that sharpness in the foreground. But think about, what focus do you want? Do you want to use a certain palette regularly? Do you want to be more abstract, more creative and impressionistic versus realistic? So think about what your niche is and just keep working on it. Keep working on it, and you get better and better. Practice, 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 and and that could be certainly be the makings of a successful artist. My focus has been national parks and and finding any of the opportunities within those um, reference photos that I take on my national park visits to either create travel related type paintings, basically realistic type paintings with a little bit of artist license, of course, and enhancing the reference photo, which, by the way, I'm not looking at the reference photo much anymore. I'm kind of just doing things as I feel like I need to do here in this painting, showing some of the varieties of the heights of the grasses now. So, so I like that, as well as um, I really like working with acrylic underpainting. So that's kind of been my forte, and to what extent that can add creativity to a pastel painting, because often when I do that acrylic underpainting, it'll show me something that say, wow, I could do this or I could do that with the painting. Now I like it better than I thought I would. So you could get some pretty good ideas from experimenting. And I would definitely experiment with styles and underpaintings and etc. Showing a little more contrast to the distance, but again, I don't want this to be too sharp. Now the top edges. This is a Sennelier pastel again. That orange yellow pastel I'm using for some of the edges. And I correct myself. That is a pastel pencil. It's a light yellow orange pastel pencil. And I'll go over some of the what look like whitish, grayish, whitish areas just to bring in some of that orange color into the buttes in the back, and also help soften the edges there where the sun is peeking along the tops and the sides of the buttes. You can use highlights like this to help also guide the viewer's attention throughout the painting. See a little balance there on the left, a little bit on the upper center right areas, and it kind of gets your eyes to kind of go around and look at the painting and follow the path. Here's that, this is like a very light beige pastel pencil to help soften up some of the distance. Again, these are really handy for blending. A little more dark contrast using my vine charcoal. Just a light, very light touch. Some of the impacts here are really minuscule, so you can do a mic change and say, oh gosh, didn't really add much. That line in the back was a bit too strong for the distance, so I'm taking my hard, like light purple gray pastel to help soften that up. I like this small blue pastel pencil to reinforce some of the cracks in the rocks. Again, working the outside of these rocks to help enhance their visibility. Stephen Ballman came up with 12 keys of what makes a really good painting, and the question that you ask yourself is number one is the concept worth painting? What's the central focal point? The composition, breaking it into thirds, right? Just as we did with this, just what I did with this um, UART paper. Now, here's that orange pastel again, and I'm blending in and blocking out an area here to create more of a sunshine warmth effect on that particular portion of the butte. Number four, value, temperature of light and value, the colors, the brush strokes of the painting or the pastel strokes, the edges, good hard edges around the focal point, for example, like we have here. It's a pretty hard edge there at the light spot there at the upper center of the painting. Um, Transitions of lights to darks and the shadows that we worked here. Drawing perspective and aerial perspective. There you go. You got some of that in the far distance where it's very hazy and far, and using those blues and purples to mute the local color there. Know where the horizon is. Always starting off with that horizon. I didn't start off with it in this case, but I knew that horizon was going to be up somewhere up in that upper quarter of the painting. And then Stephen starts about memorization, learn by practicing, and all you just kind of just keep on practicing. I do about a painting a week, kind of roughly one, maybe 10, maybe every 10 days. I've been taking a little more time lately. My plan is I record all the paintings that I do, and most of them get posted to the StudioSense channel here on YouTube. Um, a little more of that plastic palette knife to soften and blend. I grabbed a red pastel, a soft, this is a schminky red, and I didn't want to overdo it here, but I did want to balance out some red in various portions of the painting, and then I'll go back and I'll soften them up a bit because they are pretty strong. So what you can do is you could take a tortillon, what I'm doing here, and coat it with your pastel, and then use that to do some painting. Um, and uh, and it's kind of it's a bit strong there, so I'm going to soften that up a bit. But that's another way of approaching using some pastel almost as a paintbrush by applying the tortillon to it in a few different spots. Not terrible, not overdone, just a few areas to fix there. Again, some very light touches in the shadows because there are some lighter, little bit of lighter value and other reflections from the more highlighted portions of those rocks that fall into the shaded areas that you want to pick up here. My favorite blue pastel pencil, again to work up some of those edges. So you really kind of hone in on the rocks down here at the bottom left of the canvas, and then you look up. There's this path, and you look in the distance of the tree, the buttes in the distance, and see how the sun reflects and hazes things out there. So it's kind of a pleasing stroll of your vision through the painting. There's that very light beige pastel pencil again. Again, building a little more contrast with the distant butte versus the buttes that are closer to us. This is where I brought in some of that glare of the sun down the edge, the right edge of that rock structure there, and had that kind of join in with the foreground or the ground outside of the buttes. So I would encourage you to, think about that niche. What do you want to paint, and what you really want to be good at, and what you really enjoy doing as an artist, and then kind of lay out, what is your style. I keep a style document that I refer to every so often. So this is what I've found to be most successful in my paintings. Those are the ones that won awards or sold, or I've really enjoyed doing certain things, certain types of paintings, or certain techniques that I've used, and put those down on your document and use that as a guideline. So if you're working on a painting and you think you're done, you want to say, well, wait a second, let me go back and visit the style document and see what what I felt would be the most important points. And you might find something that maybe, hey, you need a little more of this or that in your pastel painting to stick with that style. Most paintings I do, I want to really think hard about what is the movement, the motion that I want to convey in the painting. I've done many waterfalls, and those are obvious in terms of motion. I've done windy scenes, but how can you convey motion without it being a waterfall or something that really is physically moving? This is the point where I'm stretching out that sandstone a little bit further. First of all, it creates more contrast, and secondly, it separates itself from that path that you could see that kind of arcs back toward that area, so they're not so tied up. Now, the other point I'll make here is notice that top left edge of that butte is even with the horizon, and I'm going to want to go and change that. I'm going to raise the edge of the butte a bit so it is a little different. There you go. So it's by creating a little bit darker value, it has distinguished itself more from the horizon line. And that little bump there, on the point, which brings it slightly above the horizon. Taking that sky color again, the very light color, and cleaning it. Whenever I apply it up at these edges to clean up the edges, I wipe it so that I don't get the edge of the butte color in the sky. Just a little trick of the trade here. Just sharpen some of those edges. So I've got soft edges there at the sun, where the sun is, and hard edges. And I think that's about it. So again, visit my website, see my store, send me an email if you want to request the reference photo. I certainly can send you the reference photo for this painting, and you could practice on photos of the Badlands. If you want to, you can always dig up photographs of the Badlands, and you can create your own paintings. So use some elements of photographs and mix and match stuff if you like. Um, so yeah, email me for the digital reference photo if you'd like to paint this. Follow me on Instagram at Bob Palmerton Art. I'm often posting new photographs, new photos of paintings that I've created, and also if you subscribe to me on Instagram or follow me, you'll also see what upcoming YouTube StudioSense demonstration is in the plans or in the works. So, and visit my website at palmertonimages.com. Don't forget that it's holiday time. Today is, it's end of November, and making room for many more paintings of the national parks. I've got a ton more to do with Mount Rainier, and I'm working on a new Mount Rainier painting now. So you could find up to 50% off on all original uh, paintings, and there is no particular code you need to apply.